Democrats assemble in Chicago Monday for their four-day national convention that, as many have noted, has similarities to, but also key differences from their notorious 1968 gathering. That one was also in Chicago and came after a surprise switch at the top of the presidential ticket. And as in 1968, protests are also expected next week over a war involving the U.S., this time in Gaza. Someone who was there almost 56 years ago joins us now, Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Doris Kerns Goodwin. Her latest bestseller, which is fantastic, An Unfinished Love Story, a personal history of the 1960s. Doris, great to have you here. So you and your husband, Dick, were there in Chicago for all of it. Both of you worked for Lyndon Johnson during his presidency. Dick had been very close to Bobby Kennedy, who'd been assassinated in June. What feels similar now? What feels different?
Well, what feels different is that it was a war where we had our soldiers who were abroad. It was profoundly divided in the Democratic Party, and the Chicago police were not trained as I hope they are now. But what happened to me when I think about being there, I was just a White House fellow at that time working for Lyndon Johnson, and I went to the convention with my friends. I was on vacation. I was doing nothing official. And it was very confusing for me because I'd been an anti-war activist. I absolutely respected what LBJ was doing domestically, and he never changed my opinion about the war. But I was beginning to feel confused as I saw what was happening there. And the police were in a riot in many ways against the protesters. It was on the screens. We were watching it. And one night when we were watching we would go out in the day and watch what was going on and then come back to our hotel suite that night. I was with 6 friends, and somebody answered the phone and said, the president's on the line. And I thought he was joking. And I went and he said to me, I have a favor to ask you. And I thought, oh my God, he's going to ask me to do something official. And now I'm so confused about how I feel about this whole war. And he said, when you were here last week, you borrowed my flashlight and I can't find it. Where is it? I was so embarrassed when I was thinking what was going on in my mind. But then I finally said to him, well, how are you? And he said to me, how do you think I am? I've never felt lower in my life. It was his 60th birthday that day, and he had been planning to go to the convention to give a valedictory speech. And he'd been working on it. It was going to have a huge cake. They had a suite was reserved for him. And then the people at the convention told him, you cannot come. The turmoil is too great. It will only exacerbate it. So they had to just put together a small party of 20 friends who ended up just watching the convention at the ranch. So then I felt so sad for him. I felt that other kind of feeling of empathy for him. So it was a really confusing time, I think, for everybody there.
That's so interesting.
A terrible time.
I mean, the
police weren't wearing their badges.
It makes you wonder about President Biden watching this convention. I mean, you talk about LBJ 60th birthday, kind of watching this on television.
No, it's got to be hard. I mean, on the one hand, he's going to be received in an extraordinary way when he gives his own speech there. There'll be a standing ovation. But still, you know that your part is finished. I mean, that's what LBJ felt. This is my party. I thought I was going to be there. This would have been my convention. At the previous one in 1964, they'd had a 300-pound cake. They were going to have a big cake again. Now, none of that was for him. And you're watching the passing, really, of your life and of your past. So I'm sure it's going to be a mixed feeling for President Biden. He will, however, have what LBJ did not have, which is the adoration of his party and the thanks of his party, which LBJ had at the very beginning, but then the war continued and it's dissipated away. But Biden will have that to comfort him, I think, in the loss that it's no longer his. You're passing the torch to somebody else.
You see the enthusiasm, the momentum among Democrats, certainly, at least so far, for Vice President Harris. Did Vice President Hubert Humphrey, who, by the way, like Tim Walz, was from Minnesota, did he have anything like the kind of support that Harris has right now?
Oh, it was so hard for him because he was tied to the administration. The war was still going on. He was trying to figure out how to break a little bit from Lyndon Johnson. In fact, my husband was at that convention, really in charge of the peace plank, and there was a hope for a while that maybe Humphrey would endorse the peace plank on which he could then run, which would be a distancing from the plank that the establishment had, which was much more saying, we're going to withdraw the troops, we're going to stop the bombing, the war is going to come to an end. But at the last minute, the Southerners told him, if you do that, we won't vote for you on the first ballot, and then you may lose everything. So it was really, Humphrey was a really good man. He gave a decent acceptance speech, but it was a split screen the night of his nomination between his talking about the politics of joy, talking about, being a happy warrior, and then you saw on the other side of the screen the police pummeling the protesters and bloodied them. There were barricades right in front of the Hilton Hotel. The police went into the barricade. The car actually went into the restaurant where people were. Bystanders were hurt. Reporters were hurt. And Teddy White, the journalist, said that night, the Democrats have lost the election this very night.
The Vietnam War was, obviously the huge divisive issue in '68. Now there's the war against Hamas in Gaza. How do you compare the political fault lines created by those conflicts?
Well, I think the real difference is that the Democratic Party was profoundly divided. I mean, there were probably half and half, if not even more than that, so that it's not the smaller minority that are feeling divided about the war in Gaza. And as I said before, it was a war in which our soldiers were fighting overseas. And so I think it had much more profound effect in terms of the party. And the party came out of that convention not united, and they never could quite get back together again. There's still a hope that maybe we've learned something from what happened there, and that the police, I've been reading in the papers anyway, that they're readying themselves for understanding the importance of free speech, but yet it has to be peaceable assembly. When I was looking at the Bill of Rights the other day, that's what you do when you're a nerd. You look at the Bill of Rights the other day, and the first amendment to the Bill of Rights, free speech, free press, free religion, is also the right of peaceable assembly. It's so important to be able to assemble. So many of the movements of our country, whether it was civil rights or gay rights or the environmental movement or the anti-slavery movement, were assemblies, but peaceful. And that's really you've got to hope that the people who are coming to protest understand the moment it goes over that line to violence, they're going to lose whatever support they have. So it's on both sides to hope that it can be peaceful and stay within a contained period of time and a contained place.
Well, from one nerd to another, Doris, thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me on.
I'll talk to you soon.